Seltzer Kings
podcasts.
In the military, veterans answer the call to serve. Now it's our turn. At Hire Heroes USA, they're changing lives, helping veterans and military spouses secure meaningful careers, all at no cost.
With over 100,000 success stories and counting nationwide, they're connecting skilled veterans with employers who recognize their true value. Visit hireheroesusa.org to access their services or to support their mission.
This episode is brought to you by Amazon Business. How can you free up your team from time-consuming office tasks? Amazon Business empowers leaders to not only streamline purchasing, but better support their teams so they can focus on strategy and growth. Free up your teams and focus on your future. Learn more about the technology, insights, and support available at amazonbusiness.com.
Real people making bold moves. Unforgettable journeys into life's next chapter. This is the Second Act Podcast.
Every day is a new chance, mindset on a new path. Anything is possible, any limit I surpass. Everything is in my grasp, I got tunnel vision with a pickaxe. Life is more fun when you live like there's no strings attached.
Well, we're back. We're back, John. How you doing?
Yeah, Michael, it's good to be back, and I'm doing great. Recording days always put a smile on my face just because I get to see you. I get to hear an amazing story from our guest that I know today will be no different. But just, talking to our guest before we hit record, the stories of grit and resilience and, everybody's got a great story. They just got to get out and tell it. And we have this platform here that enables people to do that. And man, I've just been encouraged lately by re-listening. We've kind of been on a recording, pause. And in doing such, I've listened to a couple of our old episodes and I just puts a smile on my face and it just instills me with more excitement to go out and pursue the dreams that are inside of me. And so,
Nice.
man, today's a great day. How are you doing, sir?
I am doing better than last week. Last week was one of those weeks for me. I don't know if it's because we changed cadence or it's just a bad week or whatever. And I just felt like I was stuck in sludge. Didn't feel like things were happening at the pace that I prefer them to happen. And I think it was the universe just telling me to take a chill pill, which it's good at doing. And I was in a conversation where someone was asking me things about myself and I caught myself with imposter syndrome. And like, who am I to be talking about this kind of stuff? And it was just all the things that we talk about on this show.
Sure.
With our guests and among ourselves that just brought it full circle for me. And then this week is starting out great. Lots of things happening already Monday morning, and we have a very exciting guest on. So you just got to go with the ebbs and flows.
Yeah. We'll talk about being in sludge. I was in bed last week. Let's be honest. You did the recording by yourself because my whole family was down with the flu. So I've recovered since then as well. So.
Well, I'm glad you're feeling better. You look great, by the way, but that doesn't change too much, even if you have the flu.
As Paul said right before he hit record, we're all faces for radio. So, yeah.
All right. Well, we're back on the second act. Do you want to introduce our guest today? And by the way, John, if folks haven't checked out our latest website, secondactmovement.com,
it's redone, baby.
But we've been continuing to enhance it. There's some really cool features there to discover things that are relatable to you through the stories of our guests. So if you have a chance, head over there, check it out. There's a free guidebook you can get. It's really cool what you can do today with technology and AI. So with that said, do you want to introduce our guest, John?
I'd love to.
All right,
I'd
awesome.
love to. Well, today we welcome Paul Kent to the show. Paul's journey is one of resilience, transformation, and impact. A seasoned financial leader, he built a distinguished career on Wall Street, serving as managing director and head of U.S. equity sales and trading at Jefferies, where he played a key role in shaping the firm's market strategy and institutional relationships. He later founded Idlewood Capital Partners, advising emerging investment banks and first-time fund managers. In 2012, he transitioned into social impact, merging his financial expertise with philanthropy to develop innovative approaches to gifting, granting, and impact investing. On December 1st, 2020, Paul made a life-changing decision to undergo a pioneering Ewing amputation, ending a decade-long health crisis. By participating in Dr. Matthew Carthy's groundbreaking clinical study, he not only reclaimed his health, but also gained a new perspective on advocacy and inclusion. Today, as founder and managing partner of the Disabled Life Alliance and executive director of the Disabled Life Foundation, Paul is committed to addressing challenges within the disabled community. Drawing from both his professional background and personal journey, he is pioneering new roles for accessibility, empowerment, and systematic change. Currently residing in Massachusetts, Paul's time outside of championing disability advocacy is spent with his growing family and living each day to the fullest extent possible. Welcome to the show, Paul.
Welcome, Paul.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
As you can see, we're very formal here. You can tell from the how John and I kick things off. So, yeah, that is an incredible story that we want to dig into here. But we're super excited to have you on the show and share that with our audience.
We're so formal that I have to mess up philanthropy and stumble through the bio. That's how professional we are.
They're tongue twisters. It's all good, right? It's all good.
Michael likes to give me the bios that have big words because he knows I was a Marine, and I'm only good at small words. So,
See,
thanks,
I don't
Mike.
get those jokes as much as Marines do, but
Well, Paul gets it. He's got a son that's in the Navy. So
okay, all right.
we had some, Navy, Marine Corps, Air Force, Army banter before you jumped on. So he gets it.
Nice.
And we know there's plenty of that, right?
That's right.
I love it.
Well, Paul, I had the privilege of meeting you just before we hit record, but so intrigued by your bio and so intrigued by, I told you before that the pictures behind you tell amazing stories. I know every picture has an amazing story behind it. And it's so great to have guests on with these collages of so many family photos. But before we got into recording, you were telling me about your two boys and a little bit of your life. But let's start at the beginning. Beginning of Paul Kent's life. Where did you start? Where did you grow up?
Yeah. So I grew up in Southern California, in Long Beach. I was one of 9 children. I was the 6th of 6 boys and 7th overall. And as you can only imagine, right, an Irish Catholic family with a pretty disciplined father in terms of the approach, and the mother that had to counterbalance it. As you grow up in that, each one of us 9 found our own little identities. Mine happened to be a little bit of a troublemaker. So as I said earlier to you before we started recording, negative attention is better than no attention at all. And I wasn't either smart enough or accomplished enough to get the positive ones. So I pursued that path. But that also kind of like almost defined me in a way of how I approached life and how I took on challenge and took on risk. Ironically, I ended up on Wall Street with a pretty good risk reward profile, if you will. But, it was your typical growing up, enjoying the simple things. With 9 kids, there wasn't a lot of economic means to go travel the world. So you did it through stories and recounting things and visitors and visits and all of that. But it was spectacular. It was part of like all of us, right? It helps define us, helps us find out where we want to rebel and where we want to focus our energies. So it was great.
Paul, you 5 older brothers and you're one of 9. Were there some learnings, not just from your parents growing up, but from your siblings? Because I imagine that spans a period of time. What are some of those things that either caused you to be slightly more rebellious at times, or that sort of got you back on track that maybe people would want to hear about?
Yeah, I think it did both, right? You tested your boundaries, right? The bumper rails were pretty far and wide, but you not only had parents, but you had siblings that took an interest one way or another in your outcomes. So it learned, you learned a little bit of resilience, right? You learned a little bit, you learned how to enjoy yourself, right? also as well is not depend upon your siblings or your parents or independence was a very important part of all of ours. All 9 of us are unique and different and but share a commonality, right? So I wouldn't change it, you know. Yeah, living in a bunk style room with some older brothers and being the younger one taught me different lessons, right? But you grow up and those are a big part of your story too as you talk about it. And yeah, it really does set up resilience. It set up independence. You would think with all that around you, you would have almost the opposite, that you'd have bubble wrap around you, but you really don't. And to find yourself was a real important task.
Yeah, I feel like I've been saying this often recently, but who you are today, you can't change. And why would anybody want to change that? Because if you change one thing from your past, it changes everything. Just one thing. It doesn't matter how big or small. It changes the trajectory of everything. And all of those influences and events and experiences that you had, good and bad, sort of brought you to this point today. And I would love to hear how all of those moments sort of manifested into this like catalyst into Wall Street and like how some of that started to form. Because Wall Street, as you said, is gonna have some risk tolerance there.
Yeah. No, again, you're pursuing things. Whether you're younger and you're pursuing athletic endeavors to compete with your brothers and the levels that they set, academic, which wasn't one of my strong points, but some brilliance in the family that you would pursue that. It does all go into forming you. And one thing this journey in my chronic health issue really taught me was that you can't trip on what's behind you. If you spend a bunch of time back there, as I tell my sons, if you're looking in the rearview mirror, you're going to run into a brick wall. And that was kind of set in my growing up too, as well. Is okay, you're going to make mistakes. You're going to move on. You have to, man up. Whatever you want. All the old school kind of sayings are true, one way or another. It's how you take them. But it definitely you know, look at you got 5 older brothers. You're like I joke around. You are second base, not playing second base, right? So I think it affords 2 things. Like I said, you can embrace who and what you are in all its infinite glory and dysfunction, if you will, or you can continue trying to do revision, which is kind of lost energy, right?
And were you in a trading pit or were you at describe a little bit about Wall Street?
So, well, I got very fortunate. One of the big things that changed me and differentiated me and put me on a path of kind of my journey was I was a committed baseball player. I love baseball. And in my freshman year in high school, I ruptured my ankle going back for a pop fly. My foot fell into a gopher hole. Nice field we had. But so I had to find something else to do because one thing my father was very much adamant about was that all of us do something after school, whether it be something academically or music, something. You're just not coming home from school. So I chose sports and I went to a high school that had a great water polo team and aquatics. Where and I grew up in Southern California, grew up on the water, around the water, and the water was a common theme for our family. We sailed together. We really enjoyed our time together on the water. So I went out for water polo, thinking I had an arm, I could do something, and it was great. And one of the rules was that if you played water polo, you had to swim in the spring. And lo and behold, I had some swimming talent that took me on in college. So I was really, really fortunate. I had great coaching around me. I obviously had some innate skill that they could help me harness, and it got me into the University of Michigan, which was a phenomenal thing for a closed-minded, kind of not spoiled, but maybe entitled kid from
Okay.
Southern California to go to a melting pot like Ann Arbor. It was great. Yeah, so I did all that, and then I came home actually my senior year because my mother, who had been battling cancer for the better part of the prior 8 years, who I was very close to, was not doing great. And I actually went back my senior year to Michigan, and in the fall, I was there for about 3 weeks, and I just couldn't handle the situation. So I took the semester off, went back to California. Not that my parents or my mother needed me to be there. It was more for me to be there kind of for myself, right? With the intent that I would go back in January, compete, take some extra classes over summer and graduate. Ended up not going back. I ended up with the great help of my coach at Michigan and the coach at UCLA, transferred to UCLA, and I graduated from UCLA after that. So I took these things that were unconventional and pathways and all that, and I didn't let it really phase me. What was important to me was my relationship with my mother and that whole situation, that I looked beyond what I was doing athletically in college and where I was. I'm like, okay, that's important to me. I'm going there. And so then I graduate, and I had thought about going to law school, and I decided not to. And my father, being who he is like, oh, you better get a job. And I'm like, how am I going to do that? And I had a brother who was on the floor of the exchange, and I took a little entry level job running tickets on the floor of the exchange, and it led to a 25-year career.
Wow.
I love it.
Paul, I want to go back, being that you had 6 boys, 3 girls in your family. I've got to imagine your father was this larger than life individual that, in my mind, imparted just wisdom and life lessons on you guys daily. But also, I think 9 kids. How do you parcel out time for each one of them to take away some semblance of significance? So, can you kind of talk about him and his role in your life?
Yeah, it's funny. My father and I, for me growing up, it was a little challenging, right? Because I was a little bit of the problem child. Uh, Most of my family went through parochial school. I got kicked out in fourth grade, that kind of thing. So I think for just looking at the numbers, he's like, okay, one troublemaker is not so bad, right? But it was during my mother's illness in the subsequent time, because just after I graduated, she had passed, and my father was at home alone. So it was kind of like, okay, I'll move back in with him, and that really set off a period of redefining our relationship. But yeah, he worked his butt off, right? He did what he needed to do to take care of the family. He was phenomenal, husband to my mom, and a great father. And he did have the bumper rails were up pretty tight, right? But you learn how to climb over them or move around or go to another lane. But the later years were post college and career building. He was very supportive of my career, and we got to know each other very well on a much bigger level. And I kind of, when I became a father, I'm like, you take that from our father role, right? You take what
Yeah,
you,
sure.
and then you modify a little bit to bring in. And I just thought to myself, okay, the one thing I could probably do different than my father did is I would make sure early that I was establishing that type of intense relationship with my children. Rather, no blame to him. 9 kids, like you said, the pull was pretty hard, right? So I committed myself to that with my sons.
Now, did the universe grant you a rebellious child to deal with, like you were to your dad and mom?
Well, no, actually, both my sons have done a really good job of doing what I've asked them to do rather than what I did. The great thing is my mother had passed, and my father was a very big part of my sons' lives as well.
Nice.
But he was not all that helpful because he kept telling my kids stories about me in high school and this and that. And I'm like, Dad, you're not helping here. You're giving them some latitude that I'm not giving. So, but it also, you know what, it was great because he would tell those stories, and my kids would take interest. And the best thing you do with your kids is not BS them, right? Is treat them a little bit older than you probably think they are at the time in topics. And we even so much so is that I've been journaling since I was 14, and I've got a bunch of journals. And during my illness, my younger son especially is like, I used to get worried about what was I going to leave them, right? Because I think I told you before we went on air and we were talking. The struggle was real when I was sick for that decade, and when your identity and your wealth and all these things are going away, you kind of wonder what you're going to leave your children, right? Am I going to leave my children a chronic reminder of my mortality, eroding the future that I had saved and created for them? And my youngest son just said, "Hey, Dad, I know you're worried about it, but just make sure we get the journals." Because they were curious. They knew that I had lived
Yeah.
this, and they had lived with me this whole life of crazy Wall Street, flying around on private jets and doing stuff like that to everything else, right? So it's pretty cool. It's pretty funny. So now every once in a while I'll let them get a journal, go to an entry, and because they're chronologically kind of stored, and I'll read the entry, and if I think it's something we can talk about, we talk about it.
Wow.
And if not, it's for another time. But
That's amazing.
yeah, we're very, very, very open, and you have to be that way when you go through, a life-threatening chronic illness type of thing.
I'm thinking about that scenario, Paul. If I were left the option to from one of my parents, like what would it be? And that would be a really interesting thing to almost look back in time, because you're making a very personal note about a very personal experience at a very specific point in time. So it's a window into the past, and it's a reflection of who you are that may or may not reconcile with who they think you are until they read that, which is like a really interesting thing. Is there one thing from the journal, having looked back at any of them, that you're willing to share with our audience?
Oh, there's lots. I mean, this could go on forever. This could be,
All right.
but to back to the journaling kind of concept, it's much like I'm 61, right? So it's much of what I have, or in fact, I was just looking through a lot of old photos, right? And my mother was pretty good at scribbling on the back what it was, who it was and what it was, right? And we're talking back to early childhood and all these different things. Well, pictures are a moment in time. A journal entry is a moment in time. And yeah, I look back when I go back, and I do go back sometimes and read different entries, and you're like, wow, that was me. That, wow, could be great. Wow, it could be
Right.
a pretty dark
Right.
place. So I think, yeah, I mean, we do that every once in a while. We'll do that, that exercise of reading an entry and talking about it, or a point in time, different milestones, hard ones, easy ones, fun ones. It's amazing when you do, right? It's amazing for everybody involved. And I think that's a big part of what society's kind of missing right now too, is this storytelling stuff.
Yeah.
Everybody's got a story.
Everybody has a story.
Yeah.
And all the stories are great. I mean, people want you. I think we started out talking about authenticity, and there's sort of indirectly the vulnerability of sharing your story. But the more people that are willing to do that, the more they're actually helping society, because there's somebody out there that needs to hear that.
And it's interesting you bring that up, because that's where I am now. Obviously, I have this kind of amazing story, right, of the last 4 years, and now people understand how I got to this point, right, of being the first one to raise my hand and walk in and remove my legs in a problem, right? And it was really a struggle for me post-operatively to not necessarily tell the story, but to have it want to be consumed so much. But then I realized, you know what? In stories, we all learn something and we take away, and our life can be, more often than not, better by hearing somebody else's story. And if that's the truth, then, why not? And I'm a pretty humble guy. I mean, feel very blessed. I think I told you my mantra is pretty simple. I wake up thankful for the day ahead, and I go to bed grateful for whatever happened. You get that way pretty easily when you see mortality frequently. But yeah, the whole story thing. And my kids, who doesn't, right? Remember when you're younger, you just sit around some grown-ups and you'd eavesdrop on stories, or they tell stories. Sometimes you would think it's like, okay, he's going on and on and on, and this wisdom, right? Because wisdom is nothing more than somebody else's reliving their experience for your benefit, right? So it's pretty fun.
As a contractor, I don't pay for materials I don't use. So why would I pay for stuff I don't need in my mobile plan? That's why the new MyBiz plan from Verizon Business is so perfect. Now I can choose exactly what I want, and I only pay for what I need.
Right now, with MyBiz Plan, get our best price, as low as $25 a line. Visit Verizon.com/business to get started today. Price per month with 5+ lines. Includes autopay and paper-free billing and special intro offer discounts. Taxes, fees, economic adjustment charge, and terms apply. Offers end June 10th, 2025.
Eczema isn't always obvious, but it's real. And so is the relief from Ebglyss. After an initial dosing phase of 16 weeks, about 4 in 10 people taking Ebglyss achieved itch relief and clear or almost clear skin. And most of those people maintain skin that's still more clear at 1 year with monthly dosing.
Ebglyss, lebrikizumab LBKZ, a 250 milligram per 2 milliliter injection, is a prescription medicine used to treat adults and children 12 years of age and older who weigh at least 88 pounds or 40 kilograms with moderate to severe eczema, also called atopic dermatitis, that is not well controlled with prescription therapies used on the skin or topicals, or who cannot use topical therapies. Ebglyss can be used with or without topical corticosteroids. Don't use if you're allergic to Ebglyss. Allergic reactions can occur that can be severe. Eye problems can occur. Tell your doctor if you have new or worsening eye problems. You should not receive a live vaccine when treated with Ebglyss. Before starting Ebglyss, tell your doctor if you have a parasitic infection.
Searching for real relief? Ask your doctor about Ebglyss and visit ebglyss.lilly.com or call 1-800-LILY-RX or 1-800-545-5979.
Paul, there's a lot of time that's happened between where we kind of left your story of you getting into Wall Street, following your brother and having him get you into that industry, and all the way up to 2020. Fill us in real quick with your time on Wall Street.
It was great. I was really fortunate. I joined a very small firm called Jeffries, at the time. There were 150 of us, a few offices, and we were one trick pony in terms of a sales trading place, working with institutional. But it was an innovative firm with an innovative leadership that created what they call the third market, was the ability to trade public stocks away from the exchange. And it was really, really fascinating. And I spent my whole career there, and I went up the ranks, right? It was a grind. I was in it when I started. I started in the LA office, and we had to be there at 4:30 in the morning. We were kind of chained to our seats. Breakfast was made for us. Lunches were brought in.
Wow.
It was a real grind, but a great grind. And it was a big desk, lots of fellow partners out there. And so there was a camaraderie. And then it was this firm, kind of us against establishment, if you will.
Sure.
And then after 20 odd years and more and more progressive roles, partly because I had such an opinionated idea of how we should be going about our growth and diversification of the firm, I got into senior management. And that was really enjoyable for me to have 240 odd people report into me through a process. In fact, in 2003, I took the senior role of U.S. equity sales and trading. And because I was a single father of two boys that had learning challenges, dyslexia, and other things, they were well situated into their educational programs in San Francisco, just outside of San Francisco Marina, where I was raising them. We were raising them, and when the job was offered to me, it was kind of assumed that I would have to move to New York. And when I said I can't take the job because I'm not going to go to New York, uproot my kids and move to New York, it's just not right. I got some great advice from a senior mentor. He's like, "PK, you're a great dad. If you move to New York with these kids, you're going to be a Disneyland dad. You're going to get on a train at 6:30 in the morning on Monday from Connecticut somewhere, and you're going to get home at 8 o'clock on Friday night."
Ouch.
And I said, "Not happening." So the
So the
CEO of the
CEO of the
company said,
said,
"No
"No
problem. We'll
problem.
just see you
See
every
you."
week." Which I'm like, this is before Zoom. So, um, so I would, 48 weeks a year for 4 years, I would jump on a red eye on Sunday
Oh,
night, after putting the kids down, and work for a day and a half in New York and get home Tuesday night, and then work the balance in San Francisco with travel to other places as well. But it was great because the firm was growing. We went from 150 people and a one trick pony to a multifaceted 4,500 partners global bank. And it was also then that my sons realized, even though they were younger, the commitment that I had made to them. And in fact, my retirement from that was predicated on one of my sons, my older son, saying to me over Thanksgiving one year that, "Dad, you're always tired. You're not as much fun anymore." And it hit me like a
oh.
ton of bricks. I'm like,
How old is he at this time?
Robert was probably seventh grade, something like that, sixth, seventh grade, middle school. Yeah. And that was 2007. And my oldest sister's been a pretty good confidant of mine. I'm like, "God, can you believe Robert?" And she goes, "Well, what are you doing, dude? You are kind of killing yourself. What's the means here?" And so I went one of my trips back. I said, "I'm retiring," and I did that. And I retired in 2007 from the firm. It wasn't a hard decision. It was premature on a lot of reasons, but it was for my kids. So I spent the next 2 years with my kids, enjoying and solidifying that. And then that's where my health journey kicked in around 2009, 2010. So it was actually fortuitous that I chose that time to
Wow.
commit to my kids.
Michael and I talk about from time to time how so much truth comes out of the mouth of children. Their ability to condense the truth down to just as few as words as possible, but
Yeah.
impact you so well.
Yeah, kids now in my journey now, I've got these really sexy legs, and I wear shorts. I took a picture yesterday. We got 6 inches of snow in Boston, outside of Boston, and I'm in my flip flops. I wear flip flops on my artificial feet, and kids are curious. And they'll come up, and I was at a Super Bowl party yesterday afternoon, and some kids are like, "You're like a robot." And I'm like, "No, I'm not a robot. I'm a cyborg, guys." They're like, "What? What?" But it's something just like storytelling. This journey it is something that's missing in society, is the ability to be curious. Everybody's so worried about it, how they're expressing their curiosity. And I certainly get that, right? But boy, once we start lose the ability to be curious and learn, we're all in trouble.
The
So good.
purity of their thinking and their questions, youth,
Mhm.
and what they say to adults are such sort of lightning rod event to bring you into the present and understand what's important. Because the stories we tell ourselves, like, hey, I got to work all these hours to climb the chain, to make the money, to give back, to give all the stuff for my family, but I'm never there for my family. It just takes your kids to say, hey, you're not fun anymore. We would like to have you here for us. You can't take the money to the grave with you, essentially is what they're saying.
And it's funny you say that, or ironic that you say that, because looking back on it, if I hadn't retired in '07 and I still got sick in 2009, 10, I wouldn't have had that window of reaffirming to my kids and re-engaging
Sure.
with my kids that I had. So that period allowed us to navigate a decade of headwinds that we could get through. So it was pretty spectacular. I mean, and just in looking back on it that way. And you're right, kids. I wish we could all, you all hear about, your inner child and all these other things. It's true, when you get so worked up, and I did. I was very competitive. I was competitive swimming. I was competitive, so a bad meet or a bad trade or a bad this, you wore it a lot longer than you should have. And kids, they fall, they cry, and if nobody listens, responds to them, they get back up and they, get back on that swing or that bike or whatever, right? It's
Yeah, I mean, I think all three of us are, just based on our past, one could probably infer that we're very competitive people. But it takes, I don't know, a series of life events, a life event, a comment from a kid, just, your mind starting to wander and you realize, like, hey, my head's not in the game anymore. Whatever the thing is sort of like that awakening moment. And it's like as you start to peel back that onion, you're starting to say, hold on, like my whole life I've thought this is what success is. This is the track I should be on. This is how I should think about things. If you're willing to say, was I wrong? And then explore that. I think that's a really interesting exercise for people to go through.
I totally agree. And the faster you do it, the better off you are. And so at times I was a very slow learner, right? And it makes it harder, right? And you look back on it and you go, that was kind of silly, right? That was kind of dumb. That's what it is, right? Just gives you yeah, that's why I feel very blessed to have gone through the journey. I think I told you before that I'm pretty lucky, right? I'm 61, I'm alive, I'm living the best life I've lived and arguably lived, period. But it's with such gratitude that things roll, right? We talked about identities, right? Obviously, my W-2 and my retirement accounts and all those things, right? Flush from Wall Street and everything else. You're thinking, oh, that's who I am, and you buy into it, right? You buy into it when you can
Sure.
go buy a second home and have lots of relationships. But it started to, when I was sick, it started to get to me, and I come up what I call the eulogy effect. What do people say? Usually, they don't talk about how awesome their Tahoe house was or how big that boat was or whatever. They talk about the experiences they had in it or on it or around it. And, when all of my wealth eroded, thankfully, right, to keep me alive long enough to find my life-saving situation, it was a hard adjustment in a way as it was eroding. That was part of the darkness of the decade. But yeah, you start to realize that learning faster is what really makes for a good life.
Paul, I want to stop you for a sec because I mentioned at the beginning of the show that I had the flu last week, and you're talking about getting sick like it was the flu, but that's not the case. And I'm eager to hear this story. So please fill us in as you're leaving Wall Street and you mention this illness. What are you talking about? What
Yeah,
happened?
so I have a genetic neuropathy, and my siblings and I all have it, right? We are obviously born with it genetically, and the neuropathy is a lack of nerve sensation, and it's isolated to our lower extremities. For me, it was just a couple inches above my ankle, and all it was for me for 45 years of my life was lack of sensation. Which is probably pretty good because I wear flip flops and stepping on stuff, and you don't, as my kid said, I can go firewalk, right? But and my siblings, both younger and older, had this, but never when I was 45, I got a little blister on a toe from, I was very active. I did Ironmans and open water swims, and I was kind of an endurance adrenaline junkie throughout my adult life. I had to always push my boundaries physically to keep myself mentally and emotionally stable. But I got a little blister, and that turned into a massive infection, life-threatening infection, and the beginning of a 10-year journey of that happening more frequently and with greater intensity, with me growing resistant to protocols and all this. Almost looked like a diabetic wound pathway, but I wasn't diabetic, and that was part of the challenge. My siblings not presenting the same way, me having this late life pivot into this thing, looking like a diabetic wound pathway, but then not being diabetic. It went from being almost a patient you're trying to cure or help to a research type of enigma. But like I said, the frequency of a boo-boo going into a massive problem increased consistently to the point where, I'd lose amputations and toes and slow but sure surgical sites. I never wore the same two shoes for 10 years because I was always offloading one way or another. And I'd get these surgical sites that wouldn't heal. So I'd have a wound vac on a foot, a pick line in my chest for antibiotics and all that. And it kept going for 10 years. I mean, 21 surgeries and 10 years of antibiotics, growing resistant to that. It was a matter of time where an infection was going to kill me. It wasn't the functionality of my feet, but for me, that was a really big, big challenge because I was active, and to not be able to be active took me down some pretty dark paths. So you have that, you have the fact that I wasn't diabetic, so most of the things that worked on me were diabetic related. So those were out of pocket. I spend millions to stay alive, thankfully, and that's part of my journey now. It's like I had it and I got to stay alive long enough to find a solution. Many people don't have that, right? So yeah, so couple near death experiences and realizing and all of that, suicidal thoughts, you name it. It was that dark period, and you hear that through people who have chronic illness or
Sure.
fighting something, and it doesn't have to be a physical illness. It can be an emotional, mental trauma. And when you're in it, like I was, it got to a point where I wouldn't even plan vacations with my kids because of the disappointment of having to cancel because of my sickness or something happening. So I stopped living, thinking out going further.
Yeah.
Just a lot of different things over those 10 years. But in 2019, what I've been doing in this philanthropic advisory world and social impact world, one of my clients had put some money in a lab at MIT that resulted in me having a conversation with that principal investigator that led to me joining the Ewing procedure research study, which again it's great, right? I'm lucky, but not many people have a conversation that saves their life, right? And I was searching for 10 years.
So that period, 10 years is a long time to suffer through something. So what is the thing that sort of kept you going? Because I don't know if you've read the book Man's Search for Meaning, but when you lose sort of like your purpose for living, you can sort of fall off a cliff pretty quickly.
Yeah, well, I think my purpose pivoted through that. And I actually feel blessed because of it now, right? But it was always my kids. It was wanting to be around and see milestones and do all that. And that was a challenge too, because they're still middle school, high school, going into college, that kind of thing. And you're shielding them from, you think you're shielding them from the reality of your situation, discounting how smart they are, right? And that coming to see dad in a hospital, and this and that. So they were my without a doubt, the only thing that really got me through, and family and friends. But you get isolated when you're going through it. You get isolated. Your story gets a little bit tiring for people on the periphery, right? And family really has to step in, and then you're starting to think you're a burden to somebody. And once you get in your head, it's a downward spiral. So the sooner I got out of my head, the better I got. And that was in 2016 when I had suicidal thoughts, and I had an older sister who was concerned about that. And, once I completely surrendered, all that goodness just starts to come back and percolate a little bit.
Did some of that also coincide with your pivot from, the Wall Street make a buck to the impact investing, make a buck to make an impact kind of?
I think you're spot on. I think it did help me just unknowingly that I was
Okay.
around all these people that were trying to solve various societal problems, whether it be social justice, climate, you name it, right? But they were taking their networks, their resources, their money,
Okay.
and they were trying to solve problems. So I was around a lot of really optimistic, positive-minded folks. But then I would go dark, right? I'd get sick. I'd be in a hospital for 3 months. And people, I'd try to get to my laptop after 4 weeks and see where people are going. So, but yes, it definitely. I was very fortunate. Not only did it save my life because of a conversation, but being around that positivity, hung out and being around a community and family that I knew were looking out for my sons as well. I just had to come to grips with it. Once you do surrender to things, typically good stuff starts to flow in.
It's so true. Absolutely.
And so how are your kids, your 2 boys, how are they navigating this time frame where you're in the hospital for weeks and months on end? Did that sever some of the relationship with them temporarily, or were you able to maintain status quo?
No, it wasn't status quo, but definitely a relationship, and it took on a little more intensity, right? Probably than what you would ideally want your kids to be going through in high school and college. It definitely brought us closer together. My younger son, especially because he was home for the later years of pretty gruesome, you know, visits. One time I came home with a PICC line, a wound vac, and a feeding tube, and it was just too much for him. But it was great because he could
Yeah.
save. So here's a kid in high school, a young man who thinks he's got to be taking care of his father and doing stuff like this. And he said, it's just too much. It's great, right? The strength that a young man can see, that vulnerability,
Sure.
and expressing it is good.
So you got involved with this clinical study. Was that through this, and you said it was through some of the conversations you had been having. Once you get plugged in, do you think this is it? This is the answer I've been looking for. Does it start to provide some hope? Does it start to create, the light at the end of the tunnel for you?
For sure, because in 2018, I had a pretty serious episode, another one, and my team of doctors that were caring for me were great out in California. The neurologist that was kind of around the whole thing was looking at doing some experimental brain stimulation stuff to see if they could reignite the pathways and this and that. And after I had lost all my toes and had these really deformed feet that were not really worth, and the infections was the biggest thing. The infection risk of me dying from an infection was becoming more and more acute. I said to my team of doctors then, I'm like, let's just take these things off. They're gonna kill me. And they're not great. The response was to send me to a psychiatrist. I went to a psychiatrist. She read my medical records. We had a conversation or two, and it makes perfect sense. But then try to find a clinician who will proactively remove a limb was really a challenge. The irony is in 18, I knew that taking my legs off was going to prolong my life. So when this chance conversation happened in late 2019, it's like, okay, let's go. Right. And I think I scared the doctors,
Sure.
the team that were running. They're like, you seem pretty excited about this. So, but once we got the whole journey,
Yeah.
they got the whole script on it. So the idea was in January of 20, the idea was because I was going to be an elective participant, they call me non-traumatic. My trauma was 10 years in the making rather than overnight or, at a moment. We scheduled my preoperative work in Boston. I was in San Francisco at the time. We scheduled my preoperative work for the first week in March. And because it's research and there was a lot of stuff, there was a lot of, studies, work, biobank, the whole thing. And then I scheduled my surgery for just after my younger son's college graduation. And then the pandemic hit. So that almost took me into a radical tailspin
Sure.
because every 4 to 6, 7 months I was in a hospital with an issue, and I'm going on 8 months without. So it's just a matter of time in my mind now to get postponed. And because it's research, it's elective from a scheduling perspective. So I had to wait. I had to wait, and I had to try to stay alive like everybody else was during the pandemic, right? But I had this other thing going on. And then in late July, Dr. Carty called me and said, "Hey, how fast can you get out here?" I said, "I'll see you next week." We did the pre-op. The first scheduled available time for the surgery was December 1st, and I had an ongoing issue with one of my feet. And when I was out here in the first week in August, he's like, "I got to be straight with you. This is perfect. You're the perfect candidate for this. We're really hopeful." He goes, "You got a problem. If something happens to you when you go back to California and you have medical care, you're out of the surgery. You're out of the study." So I quickly got things in order, talked to my sons, explained to them. At that point, I was debating whether to come here, and be here through the surgery for 6 months and then go back to California. And my younger son's like, "Dad, you wanted to get out. You wanted to get out of California. You wanted to try something new. You were stuck to your home in San Francisco because of your health. Why don't you think about?" And I'm like, "Okay, great." Because the irony is, my father was from Hingham and my mother was from Brockton, here outside of Mass or outside of Boston. So it was almost like a coming home type thing. But I boogied and I drove cross country, cleared my head, and stayed with some friends and found a place and prepped myself for surgery on December 1st. And I was staying in an Airbnb the night before with my sister, and had to get up like at 4:30 to get to the hospital. And I brought two shoes with me. Like I told you, I'd never worn two shoes for 10 years. I brought two shoes and I stuffed them on my feet. And I walked a little less than a mile from the Airbnb to the hospital. My sister's like, "Why are you walking?" I'm like, "I just want to walk." I walked and it was great. I got up to the hospital and lost it when I saw my sister. I knew I was doing the right decision and I knew I was in a great place when the security guard at the hospital opened the door and said, "Welcome, Mr. Kent." You just knew that if he knew what was going on that day with me, that everybody. So it was magical. Went in 6.5 hours later, came out without my feet and without my problem.
And I think, Paul, you shared with me offline a really interesting part about this story in general is that you're the beneficiary of another sort of tragic event. Like the experimental surgery came out of, I think it was
Yeah,
the Boston
the Boston
Marathon
bombing.
bombing event,
Yeah.
right?
So all of
Oh,
the
wow.
brilliance that I was afforded surgically, rehabilitatively, even prosthetically, a lot of developments all came out of the Boston bombing. And so that's why it was very important to me as soon as I got on my feet and got going that I run the Boston Marathon to
Wow.
support and let those folks know that had that horrific day that a lot of goods come out of that. And there are people like me that are for eternally grateful for their loss.
Was there a particular person or a case that came from that event that started?
No, this was kind of started a little bit before, but not just the thought in that
Okay.
same principal investigator at MIT. He's
Yeah.
very much world renowned, Dr. Hugh Herr, in the biometronics. So he's about the artificial meeting the biological and the interface neurologically. But that bombing and partnering with Dr. Carty brought it into a clinical surgical research project. Yeah, it feels great for me because obviously I've been given my life back. It's been liberated. My sons and I went through that surgery and it was liberating for them, right? They now know that my mortality is off the table. Although they tease me that this new lease on life is going to kill me because I'm doing so much stuff. But for me, it's really exciting because it's advancing science. So like now they've taken the same, special surgery, right? That was experimental to begin with. Now it's routinely executed throughout the country and the world. Our doctor's been able to go and revise limbs that
Wow.
have been amputated in the traditional way that have this phantom limb pain, which is real, and a lot of our veterans suffer from it because of the horrific amputations they underwent, the nerve damage. This procedure is allowed for the revision and to get our veterans relief from that phantom pain
Oh,
and get them
nice.
off opioids. So
Oh, that's
there's a
awesome.
lot of things, science does pay forward and goes forward,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
It's amazing.
that's, another reason to tell a story. So I say Boston strong led to Boston brilliance, and I and a lot of people around the world are alive because of it.
As somebody who's a beneficiary of this experimental high impact surgery in your life and an agent of change and an agent of hope at this point, how are you parlaying that into the Disabled Life Foundation and the things that you're doing right now?
Yeah, so I committed to myself after I woke up on the 1st of December and I looked down and I saw these residual limbs that were so pristine and so beautiful compared to what my feet looked like.
Yeah.
I just had this kind of epiphany, if you will, that said, okay, I'm going to take what I had been doing prior, right? This social impact advisory and transactional work. I'm only going to focus 100% on the disabled community because I also became acutely aware. I've had this phenomenal outcome. So my outcome, I think, should be the norm, right? Then I started diving in further, just in the amputee world, but throughout the disabled world. There are so many unmet needs, and with 30% of Americans with a disability, whether it be physical or neurological, the unmet needs are just massive, massive. And people look at it in a charitable welfare perspective. So a lot of the community remains in a almost like a victim mindset. I'm not a victim. I've been blessed, and it's how you need to reframe it. So I created the Disabled Life Alliance, which is a for-profit originally to continue that social impact advisory and transactional work with private funders who want to make a difference and solve a problem in the disabled space. And then I launched a foundation because of that's where the educational and the advocacy and the awareness stuff is going on. And between the two of them, it brings a lot of attention too. And the great thing is it's a totally investable space. How many of you have an electric toothbrush at home? Pretty much everybody, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's disability innovation, right? And Siri, all these other things we take for granted normally.
Sure.
So, and another reason I launched the foundation is I'm really excited. I got called by a studio out in Colorado that had this concept of doing like Amazing Race Grand Tour meets the disabled community, but not doing it in such a way that it's just this inspiration thing. I know there's a lot of inspiring stories and inspiration's great, I don't want to get that wrong. I just want to normalize disability,
Yeah.
right? The more we do it, it's kind of disabled content is for the disabled, by the disabled, and in the disabled. It's not going out. So we're doing this. I got this call and they're like, well, we're interested in doing, we heard we got to talk to you. I'm like, great. And it was because of my story. So I thought I was going to be a participant. Well, now I'm a co-producer. The foundation's a co-producer of this show. And I guess I have, like I said, we talked about before, I have a face for radio because I'm no longer a contestant. I'm helping. But it's really cool because the foundation, we're using philanthropic capital to
Yep.
get a TV series done, which is unique and different. And so it's all these cool things to be around because again, it goes back to just telling stories and exposing things. So I'm pretty excited about what Disabled Life Alliance and our foundation are doing to move it. And I'm kind of provocative because of Wall Street, the way things can be engineered and how we can get all this pent up idle goodwill capital.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
100%.
It's incredibly inspirational, Paul. I mean, I'm out here in Colorado Springs, and of course the Olympic committee is out here, and the Olympic training facilities and the Paralympic training facilities, and we've talked to John Register and several other individuals that are highly involved in the Paralympic community, and such an amazing place for me to be out here with the military. And as you mentioned, a lot of trauma from military, but we've got a lot of retirees out here that are seeking help. And with the Olympic committee out here, it's amazing to see these cross collaborations, and with your story and what you're bringing now with this philanthropic arm. And it's just so impressive to see somebody's story change over decades and then have such a grand impact on now so many people that probably wouldn't have had that interaction with you and the ability to tell their story because of your story. So
Yeah, the power of collective voice, right?
Oh,
If you
absolutely.
get a lot of folks, and I'm very fortunate, right, to have the opportunity to do it. So
Well, our show is called The Second Act, but I've seen a transition for you from being the youngest of six boys into Wall Street, and then Wall Street into, you growing your career there, and then going from that career into this story of you having to adapt with the difficulties you've had in your life to now giving back because of those difficulties that you encountered and survived, and this new lease on life. So you've got like 5 different stories going on all at once, but we love to hear advice from you to our listeners and to future guests. If you were to start something again or have to redo something or give advice to somebody that's in your shoes, what would you tell them?
Well, I think it's a couple things, right? My mother used to say, you are what you eat, right? Well, we are what we think. And that's one of the biggest things I think that I've learned, right? When I was in a dark place, if you're thinking dark, you're going to kind of stay there. And if you
Sure.
surrender and trust, right, that there are people out there that love and care and will provide a safety net for you to rebuild from, you can do that. I also realize that, fear is a real part of trauma, and everybody goes through trauma. You don't enter the disabled community without trauma or being born into it. And give yourself the grace to go through it however you go through it, and you will persevere. And lastly is to try not to be a victim. I have a hard time with them. They call it limb loss in the amputee world. I'm like, get rid of the loss word, please. And I realize that, if you came in on a gurney from a car accident or a serviceman, in an IED, right? You wake up without a limb. That's not a loss because that limb is gone so that your life is still here and there is life after. And so, just try to reframe it, but give yourself the grace and to go through it as you see fit, right? Try to look through the windshield, not through the rearview mirror. And it gets a little bit easier.
And it's a tremendous story of resilience, Paul. Your journey here, without question, and perspective. I think you've had some pivots in perspective over the course of that journey. And if you look back, the successful Wall Street career that led you to that 10 years of suffering, and then you being the advocate or representative to do this experimental surgery and then come out on the other side in a really good place.
Yeah.
And now championing that for everybody else and helping them realize, that a new beginning awaits for them. It's just really impactful. And I can't thank you enough for coming on the show and sharing it with our audience. And I mean, I've certainly taken away some things from your story. And by the way, I love your black and white photos that you have behind you. You have to tell me
Yeah,
when we sign up how those got there.
the one right above my head is on the green monster. My buddy did. That's about 6 months after I got on my legs. So
No way.
sitting up on the green monster with my thing. But
Michael, I was commenting on those before we started recording too, so caught my attention as well.
I thank you guys for helping tell these stories of lots of folks, of just getting stories out there because there are nuggets and, they're all personal. And I think it's important to just put them out there, put stuff out there, be your authentic self and see what happens. I mean, you can tell I exude a ton of gratitude. Well, like I said, my kids worry about what I'm doing these days. It's going to kill me, but I'll tell you, it's a lot better if I fall off a mountain trying to rock climb or ice climb or something than it is sitting around waiting. So I applaud you guys for telling these stories and getting them out there. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Paul. If people want to hear more or want to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, so I've chronicled my move from California and the journey since on Instagram, which my
Okay.
youngest son is like, Dad, you're journaling all the time. Why don't you just put it on Instagram? I'm like, what's Instagram? But Paul Walk Run there, that's got, some pretty heartfelt content. And then Disabled Life Alliance and the Disabled Life Foundation websites. And then just reach out, find me. I love to collaborate and advocate and do all those things.
Amazing. Love it. We'll include all of that in our show notes. And yeah, this has been an inspiring,
Yep.
sort of reflective conversation that, thank you. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you guys. Appreciate it.
Paul, I can't express the gratitude we have for you coming on the show and spending an hour with us to tell us your story. And I think there's a lot of resilience in there, and with people that are at the end of their rope, people that have thought that they've come to the end and they can't push any further, I think this is a story that they should give a listen to, because it will renew some of that grit, some of that fortitude to keep going. The next step, the next page in the story, because it can open up a lot more than they expect, and you're proof of that. So thank you so much for spending time with us today.
Of course. Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Till next time.
Yeah. Michael, see you later.
See ya.
The Second Act with Michael and John stars Michael Newborn and John Ballenger. The podcast is produced by Seltzer Kings. For more information on the show, check out michaelandjohn.com, or if you'd like to get involved in the conversation, give the guys a shout on their socials at The Second Act Movement on most platforms. Thanks for listening.
Seltzer Kings
Podcasts.